Chioma had never imagined that the worst night of her life would begin with warm milk and end with her entire world shifting on its axis. She was 30 seconds from losing everything. Her mother's medical bills stacked like a death sentence on the kitchen table. The loan shark's deadline stamped in red ink, her hands still trembling from the phone call that had shattered her last hope. Then the most feared man in Seoul was carried bleeding through the back door of the restaurant where she worked, and the doctors said the only thing that could save him was something only she could give. Welcome to Afro-Korean Stories Hub, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The night it started, Chioma was wiping down tables at Han's Kitchen, a quiet high-end restaurant tucked into the affluent streets of Gangnam. She moved through the last hour of her shift the way she always did, steady, efficient, invisible. That was the trick to surviving in Seoul as a 26-year-old Nigerian woman far from home. Be good at your work. Stay out of trouble. Do not draw attention to yourself. She had been in Korea for 2 years, sending money back to Lagos every month, stretching everyone until it screamed. Her mother, Grace, had been diagnosed with a kidney condition 8 months ago. The hospital bills had swallowed everything Chioma saved. When her cousin Damie had introduced her to a loan shark named Mr. Do-hyun, it had seemed manageable. A bridge loan, just enough to cover the surgery. A few months to pay it back. That was before the interest rates doubled. Before Mr. Do-hyun started sending men to stand outside her building. Before the deadline became final and absolute, 50 million won in 6 days, or they would go to Lagos. Chioma had stood in the empty restaurant bathroom that night and cried for exactly 4 minutes. Then she washed her face, tied her apron back on, and walked out to finish her shift because there were no other options. Only forward. She was collecting glasses near the private dining area when the back entrance exploded open. 2 men carried a third between them. She recognized the security detail's earpieces, the controlled panic in their movements. The man they carried was tall, broad-shouldered, his black dress shirt torn at the collar. A dark stain spread beneath his ribs. Chioma moved before she could think. Nurse's instinct, even though she was not a nurse. She had spent enough time in hospital waiting rooms with her mother to know what blood loss looked like. "Him on the table," she said. Her voice came out firm, no trembling. The 2 men looked at each other. One reached for his holster. "Don't," she said flatly. "If you waste 30 seconds deciding whether to shoot me, he bleeds out on your shoes. Put him on the table." They put him on the table. The man's eyes opened. Dark, intense, rimmed with pain, but fully conscious and fully aware. He looked at her the way people rarely did, completely, as though cataloging every detail of her face. "Wound," she said to the guards. "Show me." They peeled back his shirt. A deep gash across the left side of his ribs, not a bullet, a blade. Clean edges, serious but not immediately fatal if treated correctly. "Someone call a doctor," she said. "A private one, not a hospital." "Already called," the taller guard said. "Good. Until he gets here, I need a clean cloth, hot water, and whatever first aid kit this restaurant has." She looked at the man on the table. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." His voice was low, rough, accented English, measured and deliberate. "Can you stay conscious?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "I will try." "Do better than try." Something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked impossibly like amusement. She worked quickly, pressing the cloth to the wound, applying steady pressure, talking to him in a low, even voice to keep him anchored. The kitchen staff had scattered. The restaurant was closed. In the strange quiet of that empty dining room, with only the hum of the refrigerators and the sound of his breathing, Chioma felt the odd intimacy of the moment pressing against her like something physical. The private doctor arrived in 17 minutes. He took over, nodding at Chioma's work with something that looked like professional respect. "You kept the pressure consistent. Good." She stepped back, her hands finally shaking. The man on the table turned his head and looked at her again. "Your name," he said. It came out like a request but landed like a statement. "Chioma." "I am Baek Do-hyun." He paused. "Thank you." She nodded once and walked to the sink to wash his blood from her hands. She did not know then that Baek Do-hyun controlled the most powerful criminal syndicate in South Korea. She did not know that he had walked out of a treaty negotiation that had gone violently wrong. She did not know that in 18 years of building his empire, no stranger had ever spoken to him the way she just had, direct, unafraid, without a single calculation in her voice. She did not know any of it. She found out 2 days later. The next morning, her manager called her into his office and handed her an envelope. Inside was a month's salary in cash. "A private guest," her manager said carefully, not meeting her eyes. He also asked that we give you tonight off. Chioma put the envelope back on the desk. I don't need a night off, I need my shifts. Her manager slid the envelope back toward her. Chioma SSI, take the money. Something in his voice made her look at him properly. He was nervous. The careful, deliberate nervousness of someone who had received a communication they did not feel they could refuse. She took the envelope. That evening, a car arrived outside her apartment building. Black, unmarked engine idling with quiet authority. The window lowered and the taller guard from 2 nights ago looked at her. Mr. Baek would like to speak with you. Mr. Baek can call me, Chioma said. He prefers to speak in person. She folded her arms. I'm sure he does. A beat of silence. Then the guard said, quietly and without any particular threat in his voice, he also said to tell you that Mr. Bayun's debt has been purchased. Chioma went very still. Of it, the guard added. He said you can discuss the terms. She got in the car. Baek Do-hyun's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building that looked, from the outside, like a legitimate real estate investment firm. From the inside, it looked like the home of a man who had never needed to explain himself to anyone. Dark wood, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Seoul spread out below like scattered diamonds. He was standing at those windows when she was shown in. He had changed from the wounded man on the restaurant table. Dark trousers, a fitted charcoal shirt, hands clasped behind his back. The bandaging beneath his shirt was visible as a subtle thickness at his ribs, the only evidence of 2 nights ago. He turned when she entered. In the restaurant, she had been too focused on the wound to process much else. Now, with no crisis pulling her attention, she registered the full reality of him, the sharp angles of his face, the way he carried himself like a man who had never been in a room he did not control, the scar at the edge of his jaw that someone had tried to stitch neatly long ago. He was looking at her with the same complete attention he had given her in the restaurant. Sit, he said. Thank you, I'll stand. A pause. Of course. He moved to the seating area anyway and sat himself, which forced the dynamic into something less confrontational. She noticed that and noted it. You purchased Mr. Bayun's claim on my debt, she said. Yes. Considered the question with what seemed like genuine thoughtfulness. You saved my life. He was causing you difficulty. It seemed a reasonable exchange. You don't know me. His eyes held hers. But I know what kind of person acts the way you acted 2 nights ago. That is not nothing. Chioma breathed slowly. What are your terms? I have not decided yet, she frowned. That's not how this works. I'm aware. He did not seem troubled by it. I would like to speak with you to understand you better before I determine what I want. That's an unusual way to conduct a financial negotiation. I am an unusual man. She could not argue with that. She sat. They talked for 2 hours. He asked questions that surprised her, not about the debt or the restaurant or the night of the attack. He asked about Lagos, about what had brought her to Korea, about her mother, about what she had studied before circumstances rerouted her life. He listened the way very few people listened, without the distraction of formulating his own next statement, simply receiving what she said. She found herself talking more than she intended. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the elevator. Debt, she said. I want real terms, I will repay you. We'll discuss it, he said. I want to discuss it now. He studied her face. No interest, repay it at your own pace in whatever increments you choose. That is not a financial instrument, that is a gift. Then call it a gift. I don't accept gifts from strangers. Something moved in his expression, something that was not quite the careful control he wore like a second skin. Then come back tomorrow and we can be less strange to each other. Elevator doors opened. Chioma stepped in and looked at him. Think about it, she said. She came back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, she was not sure when exactly the rhythm of it had established itself, but it had. She worked her shifts at the restaurant in the evenings. In the afternoons, if she was free, she came to the penthouse. Sometimes they sat at the long table in his office while he reviewed documents and she read or worked on the online courses she had enrolled in. Sometimes they ate lunch from containers she brought from a Nigerian food stall she had found in Itaewon. He ate everything she brought him without complaint or performance, which she found she respected more than she expected to. He did not touch her, did not crowd her. Gave her space with the deliberate care of someone who understood that trust was built incrementally, and who had decided, for reasons she did not fully understand yet, that building her trust mattered. She noticed things about him that the public version of Baek Do-hyun would never reveal. He drank his coffee cold, always forgetting it until it was no longer hot. He kept a framed photograph on his desk of a woman who looked enough like him to be his mother, turned slightly toward the wall as though he could not decide whether he wanted to see it or not. When he was thinking through a problem he considered difficult, he went quiet in a specific way, his jaw settling, his eyes going distant, his fingers stilling. She noticed when he was in pain from the healing wound but would not acknowledge it. She noticed that his guards, the men who looked at the rest of the world with professional blankness, looked at him with something closer to loyalty than fear. She noticed that when she walked into a room, regardless of what he was doing, he noticed. Every time. Before she said a word, she told herself it meant nothing. He was a dangerous man in a dangerous world, and she was a temporary arrangement, a debt being repaid in informality rather than cash. That was all. Then one afternoon, a man arrived at the penthouse unannounced. He was handsome, early 30s, the easy charm of someone accustomed to being received well. He introduced himself as Park Sung-jin, a business associate of Baek Do-hyun's, with a smile aimed entirely at Chioma. "You must be the woman everyone is talking about," he said in smooth English. Do-hyun always did have extraordinary taste. Chioma said nothing, which seemed to delight him. "Having dinner tonight at Yongseok," he said. "If you're not busy, you should come. I'd love to hear about your life in Seoul." Before she could respond, the temperature in the room changed. Baek Do-hyun had crossed from the far side of the office in perhaps 5 steps. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch anyone. He simply arrived at Chioma's shoulder and looked at Park Sung-jin with an expression that made the other man's smile lose approximately half its confidence. "She's busy," Do-hyun said. "Do-hyun, I was only. She is busy." He said it again in Korean this time, and the second version carried something the English had not. Final, absolute. Park Sung-jin left shortly after. Chioma looked at Do-hyun. "I can speak for myself," she said. "I know." His jaw was still tight. "I also know Park Sung-jin. I did not want him near you." Met her eyes. "Because I do not want him near you." It was not an answer. It was something more honest than an answer, which was worse. Chioma looked away first. That night she lay in her small apartment and tried to be reasonable with herself. She listed the facts. He was a crime lord. She was in a complicated financial arrangement with him. She did not know the full scope of what he did or who he had hurt. She did not belong in his world. She was temporary. She fell asleep before she finished the list. The following week, trouble found her at the restaurant. 2 of Mr. Bayun's former associates, men who had not yet received the message that the debt had changed hands, appeared at the end of her shift. They were not aggressive, not exactly, but they were present in the way that communicated a threat without stating one. They sat at the bar until the restaurant was nearly empty, and then one of them approached her. "Mr. Bayun wants to meet," he said. "Mr. Bayun no longer holds my debt," Chioma said, keeping her voice even. "Mr. Bayun does not think that arrangement is final." She looked at him steadily. "Tell Mr. Bayun to contact Baek Do-hyun directly." Man's expression shifted. Something flickered in his eyes that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. "Apologize for bothering you," he said, and they left. Chioma's hands shook for 20 minutes after. She did not tell Do-hyun. She should have. 3 days later, she was leaving the restaurant through the back when someone grabbed her arm. She spun, pulling free before she could think, the movement reflexive. The man was one of Bayun's associates again, but this time there were 3 of them and the alley was empty. "Mr. Bayun wants what he's owed," the first man said. "Baek Do-hyun has not paid to our satisfaction." "Go of me." Her voice was steady, but her heart was hammering. "Walk with us." She did not walk with them, she ran. She was fast, had always been fast, and she knew this neighborhood. She made it to the main street and pulled out her phone, but her hands were shaking and she dropped it, and one of the men was already behind her, and she thought, with a strange clarity, that this was how it ended. This was the consequence of being in this world she had no business being in. Then a car cut across the street with a precision that was almost violent, and 2 of Do-hyun's guards were out of it before it fully stopped, and everything happened very quickly after that. She found herself in the car. Do-hyun was already inside. His face was very still in a way she was beginning to understand meant the opposite of calm. He looked at her for a long moment, cataloging her, checking for damage. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, they touch you." One of them grabbed my arm. I got free. His jaw tightened. He looked out the window for a moment. When he looked back, the stillness had shifted into something controlled and cold. "Why did you not tell me they came to the restaurant?" She looked at him. "Because I thought I had handled it." "You had not handled it." "I know that now." A silence. "Chioma." "I don't like being managed," she said. I don't like the idea of needing someone to manage things for me. This is not management. His voice was quiet, but the intensity beneath it was close to the surface. This is protection. There is a difference. There. Yes. He looked at her directly, no deflection, no performance. I am not interested in controlling you. I am interested in you being safe. Those are not the same. She held his gaze. Mr. Do-hyun, she said finally, is this going to keep being a problem? No, Do-hyun said. It will not. Something in the way he said it told her not to ask what that meant. He did not take her back to her apartment that night. He took her to the penthouse and had food ordered in and sat with her in the kitchen while she ate because she had not eaten since morning, and she was shaking from adrenaline, and he seemed to understand, without her saying it, that what she needed was ordinary human presence, not apology or explanation. He sat across from her and read through documents and let her be. After a while, her hands stopped shaking. Your mother, he said, not looking up from the document he was reviewing. How is her treatment progressing? She looked at him. How do you know about her treatment? I looked into your situation when you first came here before I decided how to handle the debt. She should have been unsettled by that. Somehow she was not. She's stable. The surgery was successful. She needs monitoring and medication, but she's home. He nodded. Good. Do-hyun, he looked up. Thank you, she said. For tonight. He held her gaze for a moment. You should not have been in that position. The thanks goes the wrong direction. I'm going to thank you anyway. Something shifted in his expression. Small but visible. A softening he did not seem to intend. Then you're welcome. She stayed in the penthouse that night in the guest room on his insistence and with his assurance that it meant exactly what it was, shelter, nothing more required. She lay in the dark and listened to the quiet that expensive buildings have. That total absence of the neighbor noise and street sound her own apartment was full of, and thought about what it meant to be this comfortable in a place she should not be comfortable at all. She thought about the way he had looked when he found her in the car. Not angry, not cold, terrified. For approximately 3 seconds before the control came back down, she thought about that for a long time before she slept. The following morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and found a woman in the kitchen she had not met before. Older, efficient, introduced herself as Mrs. O, the housekeeper. She poured coffee without being asked and set out bread and fruit with the calm matter-of-factness of someone who had been managing a household for a long time. Mr. Baek is in his office, Mrs. O said. He said not to disturb him until you've eaten. Chioma looked at the breakfast laid out for her. He said that specifically. Was very specific, Mrs. O said, and returned to her work. Chioma ate. She did not like how natural it felt. When she knocked on the office door, Do-hyun was on a call. He gestured her in without breaking his conversation, which was in Korean too fast for her level to follow. She settled on the couch near the window with her phone and her notes for the digital marketing course she was working through. He finished the call, set down his phone, and looked at her across the room. Studying, he said. I'm always studying. I fell behind on this module. What module? Consumer Behavior Analytics. She looked up. Why? He considered her for a moment. My legitimate businesses include 3 consumer retail platforms. I have analysts who work on exactly that. If you have questions, I may be able to help. She stared at him. You have legitimate businesses, she said carefully. Have several. His expression was even. The people who work for me number well over 1,000, most of them in entirely legal enterprise. The rest operate in areas that are less straightforward. He did not look away. I am not going to pretend otherwise to you. She appreciated that more than she could easily articulate. Honesty from a man who could have simply curated a version of himself and she would have had no way to verify otherwise. Let you know if I have questions on the module, she said finally. He nodded, returned to his work, and she returned to hers. They worked in parallel silence for 3 hours. It was, she recognized with some alarm, one of the most comfortable mornings she had spent in 2 years. A few days later, his world came looking for her in a different way. An invitation arrived at the restaurant, formal, expensive, addressed to her by name. A charity gala that evening hosted by a foundation Chioma had seen mentioned in connection with Baek Do-hyun's legitimate business interests. At the bottom, in handwriting she was beginning to recognize, a single line. I would like you there if you're willing. I will understand if you are not. She stood over the invitation for a long time. She went. He met her at the entrance. He was in a dark suit that was immaculate and correct, and he looked at her when she arrived the way she was beginning to dread and look forward to in equal measure, that complete, absorbing attention that felt like being the only point of focus in a crowded room. You came, he said. You said you'd understand if I didn't. I did. You hoped. A pause. Yes. She had borrowed a dress from a colleague, deep red, floor length. She had done her own hair, natural curls pulled back. She did not look like she belonged in this room, or she had thought she wouldn't. But something about the way Do-hyun looked at her made her feel that perhaps the room was simply where she happened to be standing. He guided her through the evening with a hand that stayed at the small of her back, just long enough to steer her through a crowd, and then withdrew, respecting the boundary without being told. He introduced her to people with the quiet authority of someone presenting something he was not interested in having questioned. Chioma is a colleague, he said to one group, and did not elaborate, which somehow communicated far more than elaboration would have. She watched him work a room. It was not the performance she expected from a man like him. He did not charm or perform. He was simply present, and people arranged themselves accordingly. She saw the fear in some faces, the calculation in others, the genuine respect in a few. He moved through it all with the ease of a man who had long since stopped caring what any given person decided to think of him. At some point in the evening, a woman approached them. Beautiful, elegant, her gaze moving over Chioma with the cool precision of an assessment. Do-hyun, she said in Korean. Then deliberately in English for Chioma's benefit, I didn't know you were bringing a guest. I did not announce it, he said. You should introduce us. Chioma, this is Director Shin. Director Shin, Chioma. Director Shin's smile was perfect and said nothing. And what does Chioma do? She studies consumer analytics, Do-hyun said before Chioma could answer. And she works at Han's Kitchen, where she has significantly more patience than most of the staff. It was such a precise and unexpected defense that Chioma almost laughed. Director Shin withdrew gracefully a few minutes later. You didn't need to do that, Chioma said quietly. She was going to make you feel small. I did not want that. I can handle people trying to make me feel small. I know. His voice was low. I still did not want it. Later that night, on the drive back, the car was quiet. The city moved past the windows, lights blurring in the light rain that had started around midnight. Tell me something true, Chioma said. He looked at her in the dark. About what? Anything, something you don't usually tell people. He was quiet for a moment. Then, when my father died, he left me the organization. I was 22. I had 3 days to decide whether to walk away or take it. I have never been certain I made the correct choice. She looked at him. The lines of his profile in the passing light, the tension he carried so constantly she wondered if he even noticed it anymore. Do you think about the other choice? She asked. Sometimes. Less recently. Less recently. He turned to look at her. The car went through a pool of streetlight and she could see his face clearly for a moment, the careful guard and beneath it, something open. Because recently there has been something worth staying for, he said. The silence that followed lasted the rest of the drive. She did not know what to do with that, so she filed it carefully away and did not take it out again until she was alone. The crisis came on a Thursday. Chioma was at her apartment when her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost did not answer. Miss Chioma. The voice was unfamiliar, male, careful. I'm calling on behalf of a group that has an interest in Baek Do-hyun. We believe you've become important to him. We'd like you to pass him a message. Blood went cold. I'm not a messenger. Think you'll want to pass this one. Tell him to pull back from the Incheon development contracts. If he doesn't, the next message will not be delivered by phone. The line went dead. She called Do-hyun immediately. He picked up on the first ring. She told him everything, word for word. The silence on his end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Are you at your apartment? Yes. Not open your door. I am sending someone to you now. Do-hyun, what does this mean? It means someone is trying to use you to reach me. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the current under it. The same terrifying quality she had heard that night in the car after Mr. Bayun's men had taken her arm in the alley. It also means they have been watching closely enough to know you matter to me. The word landed between them. She did not address it. What do we do? You do nothing. Stay inside. I will handle this. She wanted to argue. Something in his voice stopped her. Not the command. She had made clear since the beginning that commands from him landed as suggestions at best. It was the undercurrent. The way the control was barely holding over something that was not rage and was not fear, but was a combination of both that she recognized as the specific terror of someone afraid of losing something they have only just admitted they want. Okay, she said quietly. A guard arrived in 12 minutes. Do-hyun arrived 45 minutes after that. He walked through her door and looked at her, and the rigidity in his posture dropped by a single visible degree. All right, he said. I told you I was all right. He exhaled slowly. You did. He sat in her kitchen, which was comically inadequate for a man of his presence, and made calls she could not fully follow. She made tea she knew he would forget to drink and sat across from him and waited. When he finally put the phone down, he looked at her with the direct, unguarded attention she had come to associate with moments when his guard came down without his permission. "Group that called you," he said. "They are rivals trying to pressure my position on a legitimate contract. They calculated that the fastest way to move me was through you." "They right?" A long pause. "Yes," she looked at him. "Do-hyun, I need you to be honest with me about something." "I will be." "Am I to you?" She kept her voice even. "And I don't mean in terms of the debt or the arrangement. I mean, what am I actually to you in your own understanding of it?" He was very still. She waited. "You are," he started, then stopped. He looked at his hands for a moment, which was new. He never looked away from her when he was speaking. "You are the person I think of when something goes wrong and also when something goes right. You are the reason I have been reconsidering a great many things I believed were fixed. You are." He stopped again. Looked up. "You are more important to me than I have the language for. And I understand that this is not a simple thing to say to someone in your position, and I will not ask you to receive it as anything but information." Chioma breathed slowly. "Information," she repeated. "Yes, that is a very particular way to confess something." Something flickered in his eyes. "I have been told I am not demonstrative in ways that are universally legible." "You really have not." She looked at him. "Do-hyun." "Yes." "I'm going to tell you something true." He held himself very still. "I told myself for weeks that you were temporary," she said. "A situation, an arrangement. I told myself that every day until about 2 weeks ago when I realized I had completely stopped believing it." Stillness broke. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone watching would have catalogued as significant. But she saw it, the slight exhale, the shift in his eyes from careful to something undone. "Chioma." "I'm not finished," she said quietly. "I'm also scared of your world, of what belonging to it would mean. Of what happens when danger finds me the next time, and there will be a next time. I know. I don't know if I can promise that fear goes away. I am not asking for that promise." His voice was low and certain. "I am asking only that you do not make the decision about us based on fear alone." She looked at him for a long moment in the cramped, ordinary kitchen of her very ordinary apartment, with his guards outside her door and the weight of the world he carried sitting between them like a living thing. "Not making any decision tonight," she said. "Good." He nodded once. "Tonight you are safe and that is sufficient." He stayed until she said she was ready to sleep. When he left, he paused in the doorway. "Chioma." She looked at him. "I have built a great deal in my life," he said. "I have never wanted anything the way I want this." He left before she could answer. She stood in her hallway for a very long time. The threat escalated 3 days later. Do-hyun had moved her to the penthouse without asking, which she would have resisted except that her building had had 2 unfamiliar vehicles parked outside it for 16 hours, and she was not willing to be foolish about her own safety. She took her courses from his office. She brought her clothes. She told herself it was temporary. Mrs. O made her breakfast every morning and did not comment on anything. The tension in the penthouse was a different kind than she was used to. Not between her and Do-hyun. That had its own quality, charged and careful and present in every room they shared. The tension here was strategic. His senior people came and went at all hours, meetings she was not part of and did not try to be. Maps and schedules and conversations that went quiet when she appeared, not in the way of secrets being kept from a liability, but in the way of a man protecting someone from weight they had not agreed to carry. She noticed that. She did not take it for granted. On the 4th night, she woke to raised voices, which was unusual enough in his household to pull her fully awake. She went to the door of her room and heard Do-hyun's voice in the corridor, clipped and controlled in Korean too low and too fast to follow. Then quiet, she opened the door. He was standing at the end of the corridor, his back to her, his hand braced against the wall, head down. He was alone. Whatever conversation she had heard was over. Do-hyun. He turned. She had seen him angry, controlled, carefully composed, and once briefly afraid. She had not seen him like this. The exhaustion visible in the set of his shoulders, the weight of it unmistakable to anyone who had learned to read him. She walked to him. "Sit down," she said. "All right." "I know, sit down anyway." He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat on the floor, his back against the wall because there was nowhere else nearby, and she sat beside him. The corridor was quiet. The city was quiet. The small space between their shoulders held everything that had been building for weeks. "What happened?" she asked. "A miscalculation on my part. I believed a negotiation was resolved. It was not." he exhaled slowly. No one was hurt, but it could have been different. Someone tried to come here. No, an associate was confronted. He is fine. The situation is managed. He looked at the ceiling. I am not accustomed to miscalculation. You're human, it happens. In my position, it happens with consequences. She looked at him, the edge of his jaw in the low light, the scar. The way he was leaning against the wall with a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. Do-hyun. He looked at her. She did not plan what she did next. She placed her hand over his where it rested against his knee, and she held it there. He went very still. I'm not leaving tomorrow, she said quietly. I want you to know that. I'm not deciding anything out of fear. I'm staying because this is where I want to be right now. Something moved through his expression that she had no name for. Too large for any one word. His hand turned beneath hers and held on. They sat in the corridor until the sky outside the high windows began to lighten, not speaking much. And what was said was quiet and ordinary, her telling him about a memory of her mother cooking in the early morning before the rest of the household woke. Him telling her that his mother had done the same, that she had died when he was 14, and he had tried for years to remember the smell of that kitchen. By the time they moved, the city had started to come alive below. At her doorway, she paused. Get some sleep, she said. He looked at her. Chioma! I know, she said, because she did. She could see it in the way he stood, all of it barely held in, the thing they were approaching that neither had named yet. Soon, she said quietly. He nodded. She went inside. He stood in the corridor for a moment longer before she heard him walk away. The resolution, when it came, was not dramatic. Do-hyun met with the rival faction the following week. She was not there. She knew from the quality of the silence that followed that it had gone as he intended, that whatever had been held over her as a threat had been dismantled with the same methodical, irresistible efficiency with which he managed everything. When he came back that evening, he found her in the kitchen, attempting a Korean stew from a recipe Mrs. O had written out for her. He stopped in the doorway. You're cooking, he said, attempting it. There's a difference. She did not look up. How did it go? It's resolved, permanently. She looked at him then, something in the word, the particular flat certainty of it. Is everyone safe? She asked. Everyone on our side, yes. She held his gaze and did not ask further. Sit, she said. It'll be ready in 20 minutes. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her cook, and she felt his attention the way she always did, like warmth from a source she had stopped trying to pretend she was not aware of. Do-hyun, she said, her back to him, stirring. Yes, made a decision. A pause. Tell me. I'm not going back to my apartment. She kept her voice even. Not because I have to stay here, because I want to. She set down the spoon and turned. Is that something you want? He was looking at her with an expression that was unguarded in a way she had only seen once or twice, that complete absence of performance. Yes, he said simply. Then I'm staying. He rose from the table and crossed to her. And for the first time, he cupped her face in his hands with deliberate intention. And she looked up at him. And the distance between them closed in a way that owed nothing to drama and everything to the months of careful, honest, incremental trust they had built. When he kissed her, it was with the restrained, exhausted tenderness of a man who had been holding something back for a very long time. She held on to him and understood the same was true of her. The weeks that followed were the quietest she had known since leaving Lagos. She moved her things properly. Her bookshelf fit against the wall of the guest room, which became her room, and then, over time, without announcement or ceremony, the distinction between her room and his became something she stopped maintaining, because neither of them needed it anymore. She finished her analytics module. He reviewed her final project with the focus of someone who found the subject genuinely interesting and left comments in the margins that were useful, which delighted and annoyed her in equal measure. She built her own consulting proposal for small businesses. He connected her with 2 of his retail platforms as potential first clients, then stepped entirely back and let her negotiate her own terms, which she did well enough that his director of retail sent him a note asking how he had found her. She called her mother every Sunday. Grace had recovered fully enough to go back to her market stall, which she had been running for 20 years. When Chioma mentioned carefully that she was no longer alone in Seoul, Grace said only, "Tell me about him," with the directness of a woman who had raised a daughter to know her own mind. Chioma told her as honestly as she could, and Grace was quiet for a moment and then said, "Does he see you?" "Yes, Mama," Chioma said. "Then that is the beginning of everything," Grace said. The danger did not disappear. It was not that kind of world. There were still evenings when Do-hyun came home carrying weight she could see but not fully share. Still moments when the guards changed formation around her, and she understood without being told that something was being managed. Still the knowledge, living quietly in the background, that the life she had chosen came with a shadow that ordinary lives did not have. But there was also this. The coffee, always cold because he forgot it, that she had started reheating without comment. The way he read her moods the way she read his, arriving with food when she had forgotten to eat, sending her a message in the middle of his own workday to say only that he had thought of something she had told him last week and found it still interesting. The morning she had overslept, and he had come to wake her gently, and then simply sat on the edge of the bed and talked to her while she slowly came conscious, easy and unhurried, as though the whole day could wait. 4 months after she moved in, he took her to a small restaurant in Bukshan that had no sign outside, no menu, the kind of place that existed by word of mouth, and served whatever the chef had decided to cook that day. They sat across from each other in a room with 6 tables and ate slowly and talked in the way they had learned to talk, following the thread wherever it led. Over the last course, he set something on the table between them. A ring. Not large, not theatrical. A clean, elegant band with a single dark stone. She looked at it, looked at him. "I am not performing this," he said. "I want to tell you simply and honestly that I want you to stay, not as an arrangement, not as something temporary. I want you to be my family. I want your mother to come visit and for Mrs. O to argue with her about whose recipe is better. I want to keep watching you become exactly who you are building yourself to be, and I want to be the person you come back to at the end of every day." She held his gaze. "Know what I am," he continued quietly. "I know the world I carry. I am not asking you to pretend it is simple. I am asking if you want to be in it with me." She looked at the ring. She thought of the night in the restaurant, his blood on her hands, the moment she had made a decision without thinking. She thought of weeks of careful, honest, incremental closeness. She thought of her mother's voice. "Does he see you?" "Yes," she said. He slid the ring onto her finger. He did not make a speech. He simply looked at her across the small table with everything he was not and had never been able to put into words visible in his face, and she thought that was better than any speech. 6 months later, Chioma stood in the kitchen of the penthouse on a Sunday morning, watching the city wake up outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, her hand resting against the gentle new curve of her stomach. Do-hyun came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and pressed his mouth to her temple. "Oh says you've been up since 5, he said. "I couldn't sleep. The nausea. No, I was thinking. About how none of this was supposed to happen." She looked at the city. "I came here to survive, to send money home and get through each month and eventually go back. I was not supposed to find." She stopped. "Find what?" he said against her hair. "A home," she said quietly. "I was not supposed to find a home." He held on a little tighter. "Call your mother," he said after a moment. "Tell her to come. Tell her Mrs. O is already planning the argument about jollof versus kimchi, and it will be the highlight of everyone's year." Chioma laughed, and it filled the quiet kitchen, and she felt him smile against her hair at the sound of it. Outside, Seoul moved through the morning, indifferent and beautiful. Inside, in the small orbit of what they had built together from the strangest and most impossible beginning, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be.